There comes a quiet moment in life when you begin to notice the weight you have been carrying was never yours to hold. You have been saying yes out of habit, out of fear, out of a longing to be accepted, while pieces of your dignity slipped silently through your fingers. And one day, you look in the mirror and wonder when your voice became so small. But hear this, your voice was never weak, only buried beneath expectations that were never meant to define you. There is a sacred power in a single word, no. It is not harsh, it is not selfish, it is the sound of a soul remembering its worth. Today, we are not just talking about refusal, we are reclaiming respect, restoring boundaries, and rising into the strength that has always lived within you. Respect does not arrive loudly, nor does it announce itself with applause. It grows quietly in the spaces where you finally decide that your comfort, your time, and your spirit matter just as much as anyone else's. For too long, you may have believed that being agreeable would earn you love, that bending would bring you closer to belonging. But the truth has a way of revealing itself in the tiredness you feel, in the moments when you give and give, yet still feel unseen. That is not respect. That is depletion dressed as kindness. There is a turning point, though. It comes not with anger, but with clarity. It is the moment you realize that every time you say yes, while your heart whispers no, you step a little further away from yourself, and slowly, almost unnoticed, others begin to follow your lead. They take more, ask more, expect more, because you have shown them that your limits are negotiable, not because they are cruel, but because you have not yet told them where your boundaries truly stand. To say no without fear is to stand in the full truth of who you are. It is to understand that your worth is not measured by how much you can carry for others, but by how firmly you can stand for yourself. There is strength in that refusal, a quiet but unshakable strength that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. And yes, there will be moments when your no feels unfamiliar on your tongue, when it trembles slightly as it leaves your lips. That is not weakness, that is growth learning how to speak. You must also understand that not everyone will welcome this change. Some people have grown comfortable with the version of you who never resisted, who never questioned, who always made space even when there was none left to give. When you begin to say no, you may feel their surprise, their disappointment, even their resistance. But their reaction is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to the part of you that has been waiting patiently to be honored. Respect begins the moment fear loses its grip on your voice. When you no longer say yes just to keep the peace, but choose honesty even if it disrupts it. When you stop explaining your boundaries as if they require permission and instead stand in them as if they are your right, because they are. And in that moment, something shifts, not only in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, carry yourself with a quiet assurance that cannot be borrowed or taken away. Because you are no longer asking the world to value you, you are showing it how. And it all begins with a single, fearless word, no. There is a quiet habit many carry without ever questioning it, the need to apologize for choosing themselves. I'm sorry slips out so easily, as though your peace were an inconvenience, as though your need for rest, space, and clarity required permission from the world. But tell me, when did protecting your spirit become something to feel guilty about? When did honoring your limits turn into something that needed to be softened with an apology? The truth is, every unnecessary apology you offer slowly convinces you that your needs are less important than the comfort of others. You were not born to live in constant accommodation. You were not meant to shrink your truth so others could feel at ease. Yet, somewhere along the way, you learned that keeping the peace meant sacrificing your own. You learned to smile when you were exhausted, to agree when your heart resisted, to say, "It's okay," when it truly was not. And in doing so, you began to carry a quiet unrest within you, a tension between who you are and who you felt you had to be. But peace, real peace, does not come from pleasing everyone around you. It comes from being in alignment with yourself. It comes from the courage to say, "This does not serve me," without wrapping it in guilt. It comes from understanding that your energy is sacred and not everyone is entitled to it. When you begin to protect that energy without apology, you are not becoming cold or distant, you are becoming whole. There will be moments when this shift feels uncomfortable. You may feel the urge to soften your words, to explain yourself, to add an apology just to make others more comfortable. But pause in those moments and ask yourself, who taught me that my boundaries need forgiveness? Who decided that my peace must come second? You will begin to see that this belief was never truly yours. It was something you were handed, something you accepted without realizing the cost. And the cost has been heavy. It has been the loss of your voice in small moments, the quiet resentment that builds when you give too much, the exhaustion that lingers when you ignore your own needs. But you have the power to release that burden. You have the right to say, "No, I can't," without adding, "I'm sorry." You have the right to step back, to rest, to choose yourself without feeling like you are taking something away from others. Not everyone will understand this change, and that is all right. Some will be surprised, some may even question you, but those who truly respect you will not need your apology to accept your boundaries. They will recognize your growth, even if it challenges their expectations. And those who cannot accept it were never honoring your peace to begin with. The moment you stop apologizing for protecting your peace is the moment you begin to reclaim it fully. Your words become clearer, your choices more intentional, your presence more grounded. You no longer move through life seeking approval. You move with quiet certainty, knowing that your peace is not a privilege to be negotiated, but a right to be lived. There is a silence that settles into a life so gently you hardly notice when it takes root. It begins in small moments, when you choose not to speak up, when you swallow a truth to avoid discomfort, when you convince yourself that keeping quiet is easier than being misunderstood. At first it feels like wisdom, like patience, like strength, but over time, that silence begins to cost you more than you ever intended to pay. It takes a piece of your confidence here, a fragment of your identity there, until one day you realize you have been living as an echo instead of a voice. You may remember the moments clearly, the times you wanted to say, "That hurt me," but chose to smile instead. The times you had an opinion, a perspective, a truth burning within you, yet you let it fade into the background because it felt safer that way. And perhaps you told yourself it was not worth the conflict, not worth the attention, not worth the risk. But every unspoken word has a weight, and that weight does not disappear. It settles within you, quietly shaping how you see yourself. Silence, when chosen freely, can be a form of peace. But silence born from fear is a different kind of prison. It teaches you to doubt your own thoughts, to question whether your voice deserves to be heard at all. And the longer you stay there, the more unfamiliar your own voice becomes. You begin to hesitate, to second guess, to shrink in spaces where you were always meant to stand fully. But there is always a moment, when something within you refuses to stay quiet any longer. It may come after being overlooked too many times, or after realizing that your silence has not protected you the way you hoped it would. Instead, it has made you invisible in places where you deserve to be seen. And in that realization, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Finding your voice is not about becoming the loudest person in the room. It is about becoming the most honest version of yourself. It is about speaking with clarity, even when your voice trembles. It is about saying what is true for you, not to control others, but to honor your own experience. And yes, there will be discomfort in this. Your voice may feel unfamiliar at first, like a muscle you have not used in a long time. But with each word you allow yourself to speak, it grows stronger. There will be people who are surprised by this change. They may have grown used to your silence, may have mistaken it for agreement or acceptance. When you begin to speak, it may unsettle them, but your voice was never meant to keep others comfortable at the expense of your own truth. It was meant to set you free. And freedom does not always arrive with ease, it arrives with courage. The courage to say what you feel, to express what you need, to stand in your truth without shrinking it to fit someone else's expectations. When you reclaim your voice, you are not just changing how others hear you, you are changing how you hear yourself. You begin to trust your thoughts, to value your perspective, to recognize that what you have to say carries meaning. Your silence has had its time. It has taught you, shaped you, perhaps even protected you in moments when you needed it most. But you were never meant to live there forever. Your voice is not a burden, it is your freedom. And the moment you choose to use it, fully and without apology, you begin to step into a life where you are no longer hidden, no longer diminished, but fully, unapologetically heard. There is a quiet pressure in this world that teaches you to be everything for everyone, to be available, agreeable, dependable at all times, no matter the cost to yourself. And so, when a request is placed before you, your instinct is to say yes, not because you have the capacity, but because you have been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to your willingness to give. But not every request carries the weight of necessity, and not every ask deserves the sacrifice of your peace. You have said yes when you were already tired, already stretched, already in need of rest. You have said yes to things that did not align with your values, your time, or your energy. And in those moments, you may have felt a quiet resistance within you, a whisper that questioned the decision even as the word left your lips. That whisper was not doubt, it was wisdom. It was the part of you that knew you were giving from a place of obligation, not intention. There is a difference between kindness and self-abandonment, though they often look the same from the outside. Kindness is offered freely, without resentment. It flows from a place of fullness, but self-abandonment is heavy. It lingers. It leaves you feeling drained, unseen, and quietly frustrated even when no one else notices. And the more often you say yes to what does not serve you, the more distant you become from your own needs. It is important to understand that every yes you give is an exchange. You are offering your time, your energy, your presence, pieces of your life that you will never get back. And so the question is not simply whether you can say yes, but whether you should. Does this request honor who you are? Does it respect your boundaries? Does it align with the life you are trying to build? If the answer is no, then your refusal is not selfish, it is necessary. There will be moments when saying no feels uncomfortable. You may worry about disappointing others, about being seen differently, about disrupting the image you have carefully maintained. But you must ask yourself, at what point did maintaining that image become more important than maintaining your well-being? At what point did being liked outweigh being at peace? Not every request is urgent, no matter how it is presented. Not every opportunity is meant for you, no matter how appealing it may seem. And not every person who asks for your time truly values it. When you begin to recognize this, you give yourself permission to pause, to consider, to choose deliberately, rather than react automatically. And something powerful happens when you start to make that shift. Your yes becomes more meaningful, more intentional, more aligned with who you truly are. It is no longer given out of habit, but offered with clarity. And your no becomes just as valuable, not as a rejection of others, but as a commitment to yourself. You are not here to carry every burden, to meet every expectation, to answer every call that comes your way. You are here to live a life that reflects your truth, your values, your limits, and that life requires discernment, the ability to recognize what deserves your energy and what does not. So the next time a request is placed before you, Do not rush to fill the silence with agreement. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself question it. And if your spirit does not rise to meet it, if your heart feels heavy at the thought of accepting, then honor that truth. Because not every request deserves your yes, but every choice you make shapes the respect you give yourself. There comes a moment in every life when you are asked to choose between being accepted and being true. It does not always arrive with noise or confrontation. Sometimes it is quiet, a simple request, a subtle expectation, a familiar situation where you feel the pull to agree even when something within you resists. In that moment, the choice may seem small, almost insignificant, but it is in these very moments that self-respect is either strengthened or slowly surrendered. Courage is often imagined as something grand, something loud and undeniable, but the courage to refuse rarely looks that way. It is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. It is the strength it takes to say no when your voice trembles, when your heart races, when a part of you fears rejection or misunderstanding. It is choosing to stand firm even when it would be easier to give in, to go along, to keep things comfortable. And make no mistake, there is nothing weak about that kind of courage. It is one of the purest forms of strength you will ever know. Every time you refuse what does not honor you, you send a message to yourself. You say, I matter. You say, my limits are real. You say, I will not trade my dignity for approval. And with each of those moments, something within you begins to solidify. A foundation is built not on the opinions of others, not on external validation, but on your own unwavering recognition of your worth. But this path is not without its challenges. There will be times when your refusal is met with confusion, with disappointment, even with resistance. People may question your change, especially if they have grown accustomed to a version of you that always agreed, always accommodated, always made things easier for them. Your no may feel like a disruption to them, but what you must understand is this: their comfort cannot be the measure of your self-respect. There is a cost to constantly saying yes, and you have likely paid it more times than you can count. It shows up in exhaustion that rest cannot fully fix, in resentment that quietly builds beneath the surface, in the feeling of being overlooked or taken for granted. That cost is too high, and the longer you ignore it, the more it chips away at your sense of self. Refusal, then, becomes an act of restoration. It is how you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were given away too freely. It is how you protect your time, your energy, your emotional well-being. And it is how you begin to create a life that reflects not what others expect of you, but what you truly need and value. You may not always get it perfect. There will be moments when you fall back into old patterns, when you say yes out of habit before you have time to think. But even in those moments, there is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to try again. Self-respect is not built in a single act of courage. It is built in the consistency of choosing yourself again and again, even when it feels unfamiliar. Over time, that courage becomes less fragile. Your voice becomes steadier. Your boundaries become clearer. And the fear that once held you back begins to lose its power. You start to realize that refusal is not something to fear, but something to trust. It is a guide, a protector, a quiet force that keeps you aligned with who you are meant to be. And in that alignment, you find something unshakable. You find a sense of peace that does not depend on approval, a confidence that does not require validation. You stand differently, not because the world has changed, but because you have. Because you have learned that self-respect is not given to you by others. It is built moment by moment through the courage to refuse what no longer deserves a place in your life. There is a misunderstanding that has lived quietly in many hearts. The belief that saying no is an act of rejection, that when you refuse, you are turning away from others, closing doors, creating distance where there should be connection. And so, to avoid being seen as unkind or distant, You have said yes even when it did not feel right. You have chosen discomfort over honesty, all in the hope of preserving something that felt fragile. But what if that understanding was never true to begin with? To say no is not to reject another person, it is to recognize yourself. It is to pause and listen inwardly, to honor the truth that rises within you, even when it does not align with what is being asked. It is not a dismissal of someone else's needs, it is an acknowledgement of your own. And that distinction changes everything, because when you begin to see your no not as something you take away from others, but as something you give to yourself, it no longer feels heavy, it feels necessary. For a long time, you may have measured your worth by how often you could be there for others, how much you could offer, how rarely you turned anything down. You may have believed that love and respect were earned through constant agreement, through availability that never wavered. But in that process, something important was overlooked. You, your needs, your limits, your desires were placed quietly to the side as if they could wait indefinitely. But they cannot, and they should not. Self-recognition begins in those moments when you choose to listen to yourself, even when it would be easier not to. When you admit, this does not feel right to me, and allow that truth to guide your response. It is not always comfortable. In fact, it may feel unfamiliar at first, like stepping into a space you have long avoided. But within that space, there is clarity, there is honesty, there is a deeper connection to who you truly are. There will be those who misunderstand your no. They may see it as distance, as withdrawal, as a change they did not expect. But their interpretation does not define your intention. You are not responsible for making your truth easier for others to accept. You are responsible for living it. And those who are meant to understand will come to see that your no is not a wall. It is a boundary that allows you to show up more fully, more honestly, and without resentment. Because when you say yes to everything, your presence becomes divided. It is stretched thin, scattered across obligations that do not reflect your truth. But when you begin to say no where it is needed, something shifts. Your energy returns to you. Your time becomes your own again. And the yes you do offer comes from a place of sincerity, not pressure. There is a quiet dignity in that, a grounded sense of self that no longer seeks approval through overextension. You begin to move differently, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. And in that alignment, you discover that your voice carries more weight, your presence more meaning. Saying no is not the loss of connection. It is the beginning of a more honest one, not only with others, but with yourself. It is the moment you stop abandoning your own truth in order to be accepted and start standing in it, even if it means being seen differently. And in that choice, you do not lose respect. You reclaim it from the inside out. There is a quiet reclaiming that happens each time you choose to say no. It is not loud, not dramatic, but it is deeply transformative. It is the moment you take a step back from the edges where you once stood, overextended, overlooked, and quietly exhausted, and return to the center of your own life. For so long, your power may have been scattered, given away in small pieces to every demand, every expectation, every moment where you felt you had no choice but to agree. But the truth is, you have always had a choice. You were simply taught to ignore it. Power is not something that arrives from the outside. It does not come from approval, nor from being needed by everyone around you. Real power is rooted within. It lives in your ability to choose, to decide, to stand firm in what aligns with your spirit, and gently release what does not. And every time you say no to something that drains you, disrespects you, or diminishes you, you are not losing anything. You are taking something back that was always yours. Think of all the moments you felt powerless, not because you lacked strength, but because you felt unable to refuse. Those times when you said yes while something inside you resisted, those moments were not failures, they were lessons. They showed you where your boundaries were needed, where your voice was waiting to be heard, And now, with each no, you begin to rewrite those moments. You begin to respond differently, not from fear, but from awareness. At first, this return to your power may feel unfamiliar. You may question yourself. You may wonder if you are being too firm, too distant, too different from who you used to be. But growth will always feel unfamiliar before it feels natural. What matters is not how comfortable it feels in the beginning, but how true it feels within you. And truth has a way of grounding you, even when everything else feels uncertain. Each no becomes a step, a quiet, steady movement back toward yourself, a step away from obligation and toward intention, a step away from seeking validation and toward self-trust. And as those steps add up, you begin to notice a shift. You are no longer reacting to life. You are choosing your place within it. You are no longer shaped by every external demand. You are guided by your own inner clarity. There is also a strength that begins to rise within you, one that does not need to prove itself. It shows in the way you pause before responding, in the way you consider your needs without guilt, in the way you stand by your decisions without over-explaining. This is what power looks like, not control over others, but alignment with yourself. And with that alignment comes a quiet confidence. You begin to trust that you can handle disappointment, that you can face misunderstanding, that you can stand alone if needed and still be whole, because your power was never meant to depend on how others respond to you. It was always meant to come from how deeply you honor yourself. So do not underestimate the weight of a single no. It may seem small in the moment, but it carries the strength of every boundary you are building, every piece of yourself you are reclaiming. It is a declaration, spoken softly but felt deeply, that you are no longer willing to abandon yourself for the sake of being accepted. And with each one you speak, you rise, not suddenly, not all at once, but steadily. You return to yourself, to your truth, to your power, one no at a time. There is a gentle misconception that boundaries separate us, that they create distance where there should be closeness, that they build walls too high for love or understanding to pass through. And so many hesitate to set them. They fear being seen as distant, as unkind, as someone who has something to hide. But boundaries were never meant to isolate you. They were meant to define you. They are not barriers that keep people out. They are bridges that show others the way to meet you with respect. When you live without boundaries, you may feel connected to many, but understood by few. You may find yourself constantly adjusting, constantly accommodating, constantly shaping yourself to fit the needs and expectations around you. And in that constant shifting, something essential is lost. Your sense of stability, your sense of self. Because without boundaries, there is no clear place where you begin and where others end. But the moment you begin to create those boundaries, something changes. You are no longer inviting people into confusion. You are inviting them into clarity. You are showing them how to approach you, how to speak to you, how to value your presence. Not through force, not through control, but through quiet consistency. Through the simple act of honoring your limits and expecting them to be honored in return. A boundary is not a rejection, it is an introduction. It says, this is where I stand, this is what I need, this is what I will accept, and this is what I will not. And in that honesty, there is an opportunity for deeper connection, not the kind built on obligation or assumption, but the kind rooted in mutual respect. Because when people understand your boundaries, they are given a choice to meet you there or not at all. And those who truly value you will not see your boundaries as obstacles, but as guides. There may be discomfort in the beginning. You may feel unfamiliar asserting your needs so clearly. You may worry about how others will respond, whether they will misunderstand your intentions, whether they will pull away. And yes, some may, but what you must remember is this. Any connection that requires you to have no boundaries is not a connection that honors you. It is one that quietly asks you to disappear. Healthy connections do not fear boundaries. They respect them. They recognize that they are not walls meant to shut others out, but structures that create safety, trust, and understanding. Without them, relationships can become strained, filled with unspoken expectations and quiet resentment. But with them, there is space for honesty, for balance, for both people to exist fully without losing themselves in the process. And perhaps the most important boundary you will ever build is the one you set within yourself, the commitment to no longer ignore your own needs, to no longer silence your discomfort, to no longer allow yourself to be placed in spaces that diminish you. This inner boundary becomes the foundation for all others. It is the quiet promise you make to yourself that you will listen, that you will honor, that you will protect what is yours. Over time, these boundaries do not push people away. They draw the right people closer. They filter out what is not aligned and strengthen what is. They create a life where you are not constantly negotiating your worth, but living in it fully. And in that life, you are no longer stretched thin or quietly overwhelmed. You are grounded, clear, and at peace with where you stand. So do not fear your boundaries. They are not the end of connection. They are the beginning of something more honest, more stable, more real. They are the bridge between who you are and how you deserve to be treated. And when you walk that bridge with confidence, you do not just protect your self-worth, you embody it. There comes a day, quiet, unannounced, and deeply personal, when you stop waiting to be chosen, not because the world has suddenly changed, but because something within you has. It is not loud like a victory, nor dramatic like a turning point others can see. It is a stillness, a knowing, a gentle but firm decision that you will no longer place yourself at the end of your own life, and in that moment something sacred begins to unfold. For so long, you may have looked outward for validation, for acceptance, for signs that you were enough. You may have measured your worth by how others responded to you, how they treated you, how they valued you, how often they chose you. And when those choices fell short, you may have questioned yourself, wondering what you needed to change, what you needed to give more of, who you needed to become. But the truth is, respect was never something you were meant to chase. It was something you were meant to embody. Choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness, though it may feel that way at first. It is an act of alignment. It is the moment you stop negotiating your worth for acceptance. It is when you begin to ask yourself different questions. Not will they approve, but does this honor me? Not will this keep them happy, but will this keep me at peace? And those questions begin to guide you in ways you may not have experienced before. There is a quiet power in that shift. You begin to move differently, not out of fear of losing others, but out of a deep commitment to not losing yourself. You start to notice where you once overextended, where you once stayed too long, where you once accepted less than you deserved. And instead of repeating those patterns, you choose differently. Not perfectly, not all at once, but intentionally. And yes, there may be loss in this choosing. Some people may not understand your change. Some may step back when they realize you are no longer willing to shrink, to bend, to give endlessly without receiving the same care in return. But what leaves your life in those moments is not respect, it is the absence of it. What remains, or what comes later, is something far more meaningful. It is connection built on mutual value, on honesty, on a shared understanding of boundaries and worth. Respect begins to find you in subtle ways, in how people speak to you, in how they consider your time, in how they respond when you say no without explanation. But even more importantly, it begins to live within you. You no longer question your right to take up space. You no longer feel the need to justify your needs. You no longer look for permission to be who you are. Choosing yourself also means trusting yourself. Trusting that your needs are valid, that your limits are real, that your desires deserve attention. It means listening when something feels wrong and honoring it, even if it means standing alone for a while. Because in that solitude there is strength, there is clarity, there is a deeper relationship with yourself that no external validation can replace. And over time, that relationship becomes your foundation. It steadies you, it guides you, it reminds you, even in moments of doubt, that you are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to be true to yourself, and from that truth, everything else begins to align. The day you choose yourself is not the day the world suddenly decides to respect you. It is the day you stop accepting anything less. It is the day you no longer wait to be valued, because you have already claimed that value within. And from that place, respect is no longer something you seek. It is something that naturally follows, quietly and consistently, wherever you go.